When the car accident happened, Blake instinctively protected his first love and pushed me toward death. He justified it, saying, "I know you're a player who can restart." But he didn't know. That was my last chance to complete a mission. Chapter 1. When the out-of-control truck came barreling toward the sidewalk, I was in the middle of arguing with Blake. Today was our 2-year anniversary, yet he was 2 hours late because he had gone to pick up his first love, who had just returned to the country. "Can you stop being so petty?" Blake stood by the roadside, looking at me with disappointment in his eyes. "Zara and I grew up together, she's all alone here. Isn't it right that I go pick her up?" I challenged him. "So, you're planning to spend our anniversary with all 3 of us?" Blake choked up, unable to respond. But Zara, standing behind him, glanced between us, her eyes welling with tears as she spoke, her voice almost breaking. "Noelle, please don't be upset. Blake only felt sorry for me and wanted to take me out to eat." Her eyes were filled with tears, like a delicate white flower trembling in the wind. "If you don't want me here, I'll leave." With that, she turned to go. Blake quickly stopped her, shooting me a warning look as he spoke. "Noelle, if you keep making a scene, we're breaking up." I froze. In the 2 years I've been dating Blake, whenever something didn't go his way, he'd threaten to break up, just like now. At that moment, I heard the system's warning. Warning. Breakup will result in mission failure. If I failed the mission, I'd not only lose the reward but be erased. Seeing me fall silent, Blake curled his lips in satisfaction and took my hand. "All right, Noelle, we're not breaking up. Let's have dinner, then I'll take her home, okay?" My nails dug into my palm as I forced a smile and replied, "Okay." Perhaps thinking he had me under control, Blake was in a cheerful mood all the way. He wrapped an arm around my waist, leaned in slightly, and lowered his voice to say, "Noelle, you're being so good." The intimate gesture made Zara, following behind us, go pale. But I ignored her. Because before I started this mission with Blake, I'd observed him for a long time. The Blake I knew before was mature and steady, nothing like he is now. So childish, using the threat of a breakup to force me to comply. But what exactly feels off? Chapter 2. Lost in thought, I was suddenly jolted by the blare of a horn. I looked over and saw an out-of-control truck speeding onto the sidewalk, heading straight for us. The crowd erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air. Blake's first instinct was to grab my hand and run, but then he glanced back and saw Zara standing frozen in place. She was crying, her face streaked with tears. "Blake, please. Save me. I don't want to die." Blake panicked. Without thinking, he shook my hand off, but he didn't control his strength. Wearing high heels, I lost my balance and, caught off guard by his shove, fell to the ground and couldn't get up due to the pain. "Blake." I called out to him with all my strength. He paused for a moment but didn't turn around. He rushed to Zara, pulling her to safety. As the truck came closer and closer, everyone else was fleeing for their lives, leaving me to fend for myself. Bang. Amid the screeching of tires and the intense pain tearing through my body, I realized clearly. I was about to die. After the searing pain, a flash of blinding white light filled my vision. When I regained consciousness, my soul was already hovering above. The system sighed. "Host, you've died again." "Why again?" Because throughout the process of winning over Blake, I had already died twice before. The first time was by drowning. Blake had to choose between me and Zara. He chose Zara. The second time was during an earthquake, another choice between me and Zara. He chose Zara again. Now, in this car accident, with the same choice, he chose Zara once more. The system asked me. I suggested switching to a different target, but you refused. "Do you regret it now?" I replied. "No, I don't regret it." There was a brief silence. The system, usually so cold and robotic, sounded uncharacteristically frustrated, as if furious with me for my stubbornness. "Host, do you understand? That was your final chance to complete this mission. The last one. Do you know what that means? Of course, I understand. This means I'll never be able to reincarnate again. But I really don't regret it. We agreed from the start, if you successfully completed the mission, you'd get a reward. Now that you've failed, you'll have to accept the corresponding punishment. I responded with a simple, Then I asked, what's the punishment? Your soul will be eternally bound to Blake's side. As soon as it spoke, an invisible force pulled me back to the scene of the accident. The wind roared in my ears. The system's questions echoed around me. What's so special about Blake? Is he worth wasting all your chances just to stay by his side? If I'd known you were this obsessed, I wouldn't have interfered. I should have just let you do as you pleased. I blinked, my eyes stinging, and after a long silence, I answered softly. Yeah, don't worry about me anymore. Chapter 3. The system never expected that response from me. It couldn't understand my obsession with Blake and, frustrated, scolded me a few more times before falling silent. Feeling bored, I floated to the top of a nearby car, resting my chin in my hands as I watched the chaotic crowd below. In an instant, I spotted two familiar figures. Zara was tugging at Blake's sleeve, talking to him, but he seemed oblivious to her. He stood motionless, staring at something. Oh, wait. He was staring at my body, crushed under the truck. It was as if everything around him had frozen. After a long moment, he suddenly shoved Zara away, stumbling as he rushed toward me. He even fell, his hand bleeding from the impact. My body was beyond recognition, and he couldn't bear to look at it for more than a second before he turned away. From a distance, I watched him mouth something under his breath. Curious, I floated over to him, listening closely. The moment I heard his words, it felt like a bolt of lightning struck me. He said, Noelle, you'll be all right. I know you're a mission player, you can reincarnate. You've died twice before and always came back. This time will be no different, right? He seemed to steady himself, took a deep breath, wiped his face, and declared firmly. I'll wait for you to come back. I was stunned. So that's why. That's why Blake knew he could control me with the mere mention of breaking up. Because he knew from the beginning that I was a mission player. But he didn't know that this was my last chance. Blake, I can't come back anymore. The ambulance and police arrived at the scene, and when the paramedics tried to move my body, Blake blocked them fiercely. Don't touch Noelle. She's not dead. She'll wake up in a few days. Everyone exchanged uncertain glances. The paramedic tried to comfort him. Blake, I know this is hard, but your girlfriend has passed. You need to take care of yourself. At the word dead, Blake's emotions surged. He grabbed the paramedic by the coat, veins bulging in his arm, and shouted. Shut up. Noelle isn't dead. She can't be. She was just. His voice broke off. I saw a nurse give him an injection, likely a sedative. With a pained gasp, he clutched his arm, took a step back, and soon collapsed onto the stretcher. Inside the ambulance, a heavy silence lingered. No one spoke the entire way. Until the nurse cleaning Blake's wound gasped softly. Everyone followed her gaze and saw. Blake was crying. He was still unconscious, unaware of his surroundings, but the tears had soaked into the dark stretcher. They must have been close. Someone murmured. Yeah, it's really tragic. Hearing this, I couldn't help but scoff. If they had known the old Blake, they'd understand just how much he used to despise me. Chapter 4. The year I met Blake was the darkest of my life. My parents divorced, neither wanting custody of me. The only person who'd ever been kind to me had passed away that winter. After my depression diagnosis, I'd clutched a small knife, tempted to drive it into my stomach for the first time, when the system approached me. It said that if I completed the mission, helping it reach its quota, I could exchange my reward. My eyelids fluttered as I asked. Can you bring someone back to life? The system replied confidently. Of course. It gave me a few days to choose a mission target. But no one interested me. Until I saw Blake at the Memorial Park, sitting on the long, damp steps as a fine spring rain soaked the strands of hair falling over his forehead. He didn't speak or cry. He just sat there in silence. The wind stirred the willow branches, and I stood some distance away, staring at the teardrop mole by the corner of his eye for a long, long time. Then gently open your lips and tell the system. I choose him. The difficulty of his conquest is very high, and before you. The system hesitated to remind me. Several conquerors have already been eliminated due to failure. Are you sure? I nodded firmly. Unable to resist me, the system reluctantly applied for 3 conquest opportunities for me. The higher the difficulty factor, the more conquest opportunities there are. From that day on, I spent time observing Blake, discovering that he was gentle and humble towards everyone, polite and courteous. But it was precisely this kind of person who, upon seeing me for the first time, spoke arrogantly. Tell me. Is it a sprained ankle this time, or are you going to throw yourself at me directly? I was stunned. He squinted at me, sneered, and said, "What are you pretending to be foolish for? Women like you, even if you stand naked in front of me, I still won't like you." At that time, I didn't understand what he meant. Looking back now, he probably knew I was a conqueror at that time. Otherwise, why would he be so repulsed by me? Later, I always stayed close to him at a distance. Once his friend called me, saying he had a stomach ache and asked me to bring medicine. When I arrived, I saw him sitting energetically on the couch. He asked me, "Why are you here again? You're like a lingering ghost." I pursed my lips, didn't say a word, and just handed him the medicine. He didn't take it. Instead, he leaned down slightly, whispered in my ear, "Since you're here, let me treat you to a drink, hum?" As soon as he finished speaking, my vision blurred. The red wine poured down from the top of my head, wetting my chest along my cheeks. Summer clothes are thin, and even the color of the straps is clearly visible. Blake glanced casually, seeing no reaction from me. He seemed even angrier. Being humiliated by me like this, and being watched by so many people, Noelle, don't you have any self-respect? Only then did I look up at him. The flickering lights sprinkled on his clear and bright face, the teardrop mole at the corner of his eye swaying. In that moment, I opened my mouth, unable to say a word of retort. It's hard to imagine that such a person would later agree to be with me. It was a street racing competition. Blake unprecedentedly sent me an invitation. When I arrived, I happened to see him standing on the awards podium, embracing 2 hot car model girls. Our eyes met, and he smiled at me. A very mischievous smile. Then, under my gaze, he slowly kissed their lips. "You wanted to be with me, right? How about now?" He asked me after the show. I helped him wipe off the remaining lipstick from the corner of his mouth. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes." He looked at me for a long time, his eyes dark and unclear. Suddenly, he grabbed my wrist, pointed to the nearby racing cars, and asked me fiercely, "Dare to play a game of life or death speed? If you win, we'll be together." The rules of life or death speed were wild. 2 cars collide, whoever brakes first loses. The whole place was in an uproar. Several girls tried to intervene for me. "Oh, forget it, Noelle has no experience at all, are you forcing her to risk her life?" "Yeah." "Don't let the girl get hurt." Blake remained indifferent, while I looked up at his face and slowly uttered 2 words. "I dare." His pupils suddenly contracted, and something seemed to flash in his eyes. I couldn't distinguish what it was. Anyway, in that race, he was the first to hit the brakes. When I got out of the car, my stomach was churning, and I stumbled and knelt down on the ground. Blake angrily threw his helmet, pulled me up, and roared at me. "Are you out of your mind?" And I just calmly looked at him and asked, "Can we be together now?" His eyes reddened, and he remained silent for a while. And so, we naturally dated for 2 years. Everyone said I loved Blake too much. But every time this reached Blake's ears, he would just stare at me intensely, his thin lips curling into a mocking smile. Love? This kind of woman is the best at deceiving others. She doesn't love me at all. I lowered my eyes and said nothing. After that, he often brought women home, testing my limits, threatening to break up at the slightest disagreement, forcing me to compromise. Later on, Zara went back to her country. 3 either-or choices. Every time, I died from Blake's choice. Every time I died, the world would reset. Until I used up my last conquest opportunity, unable to reincarnate anymore. Actually, thinking about it carefully, how could someone being conquered have any sympathy for a conqueror who is insincere and deceitful, knowing everything? In the end, I was too naive. Chapter 5. When Blake woke up, I was floating around the hospital room in boredom. The door suddenly burst open. Zara, with red eyes, walked up to him, firmly grasping his hand, and asked in concern. "Blake, are you feeling better? You scared me earlier," he said. She was referring to the scene of the accident when Blake said I would wake up again. But it was clear that Blake didn't want to chat with her. He propped himself up, unlocked his phone, glanced at the time, and suddenly exclaimed. "It's been 2 hours already?" Confused, Zara echoed. "Yes, what's wrong?" Blake's emotions trembled violently beneath his eyes, his fingers involuntarily trembling slightly, his voice tense. "This can't be, it's absolutely impossible." Startled by his reaction, Zara stood still, not daring to speak. The first 2 times, less than half an hour after I died, the world restarted. But this time, 2 hours had passed, and the world continued to turn. Blake suddenly stood up, his expression desolate, like a trapped beast. After a moment, as if he suddenly remembered something, he pulled out the 4-line and ran out. Zara hurried to chase after him. I floated behind them, secretly speculating where Blake might be going. It wasn't until I saw the familiar house number that I realized he was coming to my house. When the door lock was forced open, Blake rushed in first, searching for my figure everywhere. "Noelle, I know you're not dead. Are you hiding from me?" No one in the living room, no one in the kitchen, and no one in the study. Finally, my bedroom. After pushing the door open, he suddenly stopped, as if nailed in place, unable to move. Because the walls all around, covered with photos. As he looked at each one, a faint blush crept into the corners of his eyes. "Blake, did you take so many photos with her?" Zara's expression turned ugly, unable to contain the jealousy in her eyes. "We've known each other for over a decade, and you never." Mid-sentence, she suddenly fell silent. Blake stared at her intensely, his face turning a shade of gray, almost ashen. Almost squeezing out from his throat, he uttered these 4 words. "This isn't me." I looked at the man in the photos with a warm smile, and couldn't help but curve my lips. Yes, that wasn't Blake. Why did I choose him as my conquest target at first sight? Why waste all 3 chances on him? Just because of his face? That identical face of his. The balcony window wasn't closed properly, letting in the evening breeze that swept away a group photo. Blake picked it up, saw the elegant handwriting on the back, and suddenly his eyes turned red. "Wishing my Noelle safety and peace." Read. Chapter 6. Memories, like the twilight wind, slowly dispelled the haze in my heart. The first time I heard the name Reed. It was 10 years ago, on the afternoon of the sophomore class division exam. My deskmate was a troublemaker who even copied my homework. Before the exam, he asked me to help him cheat, but I refused. So that day after school, he blocked me at the back door of the classroom and mocked me in front of all our classmates. "Fatty, not only are you ugly, but you also have a bad heart. Letting you pass the answers was a good deed, you know? You're ungrateful, it serves you right to be both fat and ugly." At that time, due to treating acne with Chinese medicine, my hormones were in chaos, and I did look as chubby as a penguin. Many classmates echoed his words. My face turned red, overwhelmed by a wave of self-doubt. In the midst of all the ridicule, a clear male voice suddenly interjected. Feeling proud by commenting on a girl's appearance like that? I looked towards the voice. Wearing a black t-shirt, with a black cap on, a youth with his hands in his pockets stood beside me. Later, I found out his name was Reed. He was a senior student 2 years older than me. Reed raised his chin, glanced at my deskmate, and said contemptuously, "Talking to you, trash, scum? Don't you understand how to respect girls?" My deskmate was stunned, then reacted by cursing and taking off his school jacket to fight. Reed took 2 steps forward and stood in front of me. I don't remember clearly what happened next. Before the fight, Reed placed his cap on my head, blocking my view completely. All I could hear was my deskmate's painful grunts. When everything quieted down, I slowly raised my head and met a pair of cold eyes. "It's over, you can go home now." Reed's voice was low, yet carried a comforting strength. From that day on, my deskmate never caused trouble for me again, and even took the initiative to switch seats with another student. I knew Reed had something to do with it. Because on several occasions after school, I saw him with his arm around my deskmate's shoulder, appearing to be joking, but with an extremely cold look in his eyes. "Hey, bro, spare me this time, I won't dare to bully girls anymore." Reed, with a serious expression, kicked him. "Learn to keep your mouth shut?" Yes, I've learned my lesson." Once his expression softened a bit, my deskmate rode away on his bike. I was very grateful to Reed. So, I bought a bunch of snacks to thank him. At that time, he was playing basketball with his friends. Upon hearing my intention, he raised an eyebrow, took the cheapest lollipop from his pocket, and smiled at me, saying, "Thanks, you can keep the rest." And so, I carried the snacks back to the classroom. Passing by the school store after school, a few meters away, Reed and his friends were walking ahead. I overheard someone asking him, "Who was the girl who brought snacks this afternoon? Her face is pretty, but she's too fat." I instinctively held my breath, wanting to hear his answer. Reed suddenly stopped in his tracks, patted the person's shoulder, and said sternly, "Shut your mouth." After a few steps, he took out the lollipop from his pocket, unwrapped it, put it in his mouth, and mumbled, "Quite cute." My steps halted in place. Watching their retreating figures, I suddenly realized. That was the first time someone described me as cute. A tingling sensation ran through my heart, making me feel fuzzy. The workload in my senior year was heavy, and I lost over 20 pounds due to stress. Gradually, many boys started pursuing me, writing me love letters. But because of this, I was excluded by a group of girls. They called me to a corner where no one could see us, away from surveillance. I was pushed to the ground, and the leader of the group poured a cup of scalding hot water bit by bit onto my calf. "You used to be so fat, now you've lost weight and even wear skirts, huh? Who are you trying to seduce? My boyfriend wrote you a love letter, are you proud of yourself?" I was in so much pain that I couldn't speak properly, my voice intermittent. "Who is your boyfriend?" This sentence seemed to offend her, and she got even angrier, instructing others to hold my chin while the hot water was aimed at my face. I instinctively closed my eyes. But the expected pain didn't come, instead, I fell into a warm embrace. The young man's firm chest muscles almost suffocated me. "How are you feeling?" Upon hearing the familiar crisp voice, I suddenly opened my eyes and found that my back was already soaked in cold sweat. The girl who had been pushed down screamed in agony. The boiling water had burned her own face. It was quite a commotion, and when the discipline master arrived, those few girls were so scared that they spilled everything. Reed greeted the discipline master, picked me up in his arms, and rushed to the school infirmary. As the disinfectant was applied, the pain made me want to cry. But I gritted my teeth, desperately trying to hold back the tears. Reed lowered his eyes, looked at me for a while, opened his mouth, and said, "If you feel like crying, just let it out. I'm not someone who cries easily. Ever since I was very young, my parents had affairs. They didn't love me, and their marriage was just to have me registered. Every time I felt wronged and wanted to talk about it, all I got was scolding and reprimands. All right, why are you so sensitive? So what if you were called fat, who hasn't been insulted before? In the past, when I saw other children cry, their parents would come to comfort them. But if I cried, my parents would just get even more annoyed with me. Tears in front of those who don't care about you are just useless liquid. So, no matter how upset I was later on, I never cried again. But that evening, in the infirmary, Reed ruffled my hair, bent down to look at me, and said, "Your eyes are red." I closed my eyes, wanting to turn away, but then I heard him sigh. "Noelle. You can show your vulnerability in front of me." Chapter 7. Because of that statement, my tears burst forth instantly. I cried until it was getting dark outside, and the school nurse was preparing to leave when I realized I didn't have my wallet with me. Reed lent me the money. I noted down his phone number, added him as a friend when I got home, and transferred the money. But he didn't accept it for a long time, until he returned it the next day. I tentatively sent a question mark. He replied instantly. "What's wrong? Why aren't you taking it? Just owe me for now, we'll have a meal after your college entrance exam." I held my phone, a smile unconsciously appearing on my lips. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. After the college entrance exam, Reed disappeared as if he had evaporated from the face of the earth. All the messages I sent him went unanswered. Meeting again, it was during my sophomore year in college, on the family reunion New Year's Eve. My parents had already started living separately, and I was alone in the huge house. Firecrackers downstairs were popping, but I huddled in my room, watching the New Year's gala alone. As the clock struck midnight, my phone suddenly vibrated. "LX, Happy New Year." I was stunned. My heartbeat skipped a beat, and my fingertips trembled as I typed. "Reed, is that you? Or has your account been hacked?" The message box showed, typing. I waited for about 5 minutes, finally getting his reply. It was very short, just 2 words. "It's me. Where have you been these past 2 years, why? Why didn't you contact me?" I couldn't bring myself to say the second half of the sentence. But it seemed like the person on the other side had a premonition and called me. I picked up. Unexpectedly, I heard that familiar yet unfamiliar crisp voice, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. But Reed was the one who broke the silence first. He asked me to go to the balcony, facing the 2 o'clock direction. Confused, I followed his instructions. After about 10 seconds, there was a loud bang. A brilliant firework burst in the lonely night, petals falling like rain, as if within reach. I kept holding the phone to my ear, looking up for a long time. On the other end, a man's deep voice sounded. "Sorry, had a mission before, had to hand in my phone. I missed a lot of your messages." My breath hitched. Suddenly, I remembered, Reed enrolled in the police academy. "Last year today, you wished me a happy new year, this year it's my turn to wish you one." After hanging up the call, I saw the responses from my parents. "Happy New Year, Dad." "Got it." "Happy New Year, Mom." "Busy." None of them wished me a happy new year, except for Reed. Only Reed. Reed, who had been out of touch for 2 years, suddenly set off fireworks for me on New Year's Eve and wished me a happy new year. I've said it before, I don't like crying. But tears just won't listen. The 3rd and 4th years of college were some of the few happy times I had. After Reed was transferred back to our city, we started meeting more often, and our relationship gradually became closer. My roommate asked me, "Is the handsome guy downstairs who always picks you up your boyfriend?" I denied it, saying, "No, he's just a big brother." After answering, my face flushed with heat. Would a big brother take his little sister to a couple's restaurant for a date every week? Would a big brother play truth or dare and when asked if he liked any girls present, look at her? Would a big brother find out at 2 in the morning that his sister was in pain, climb over the wall to carry her to the hospital, and stay up all night massaging her stomach? No, he wouldn't. But I didn't dare ask more. To me, Reed was like a traveler in the desert, a distant oasis suddenly seen. I could only gaze at it foolishly from afar. Afraid that if I got too close, the beautiful dream would shatter. At the end of May, nearing graduation, I was exhausted every day from my final project. Reed drove me to the beach to relax. On the way, we met several couples who invited us to join in kayaking. It seemed to be some kind of competition organized by a company, and they were suddenly short of people. "Come on, miss, your boyfriend has a great physique and good stamina, right? If you win first place, there's a reward." My ears turned red. He's not. Okay. Reed cut off my words. I looked at him, unsure if it was my imagination. The corner of his lips seemed to twitch. As we got on the kayak, just seconds before the competition started, I belatedly asked, "So, what's the reward for first place?" Reed's gaze shifted, and he answered somewhat unnaturally. "A very exquisite Swiss Army knife." Very exquisite? Listening to his tone, Reed seemed to really like it. Holding on to the belief of winning first place, even though neither Reed nor I had much experience, we somehow fought our way to the top 3. But first place seemed to be on a whole different level. In the end, even Reed, with his good stamina, was gritting his teeth and pushing through. I caught a glimpse of the bulging veins on his arm and the cold sweat on his forehead. I really wanted to tell him, "It's okay, if we don't win. Tonight, I'll give you an even more exquisite knife." Between thoughts, our kayak was gradually catching up with the first place. As we passed by them, the couple on the other side suddenly let go of the paddle, laughing and saying to Reed, "Bro, you're really going all out." "My wife is shy, she wouldn't feel comfortable kissing in front of so many people. Let's just give first place to you guys." I was stunned. What kiss? Wasn't it supposed to be a Swiss Army knife? Turning back to meet Reed's eyes, filled with a mischievous smile, I realized that I had been deceived. "Sorry, I was scheming." Reed held my hand, standing by the beautiful sea at sunset, softly apologizing to me. The reward for first place had never been a Swiss Army knife. It was 2 tickets to fly to the capital, and a kiss with your loved one. My head buzzed. Pretending to be clueless any longer would be pointless. "Reed, you don't have to try so hard, actually. You don't have to try so hard, I would still be with you." He gazed quietly at me and slowly spoke. "Noelle. It's because I wanted to win. It's because I wanted to be with you. And it's also because I wanted." He pursed his lips, gently cupping my face. "To kiss you." Thump thump thump. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. Reed tilted his head and earnestly kissed my forehead. The scene froze at that moment. "Noelle, I'm holding your hand." Chapter 8. Being Reed's girlfriend is a very happy thing. He is always gentle, always emotionally stable. No matter how many conflicts arise between us, he is always the first to lower his head. "Missy, I was wrong. Please, forgive me." When I received this text asking for reconciliation, I was standing at the police station entrance, delivering medicine to him. Reed has a weak stomach, and every now and then, he would complain of stomach pain. When he saw me standing there as he left work with his colleagues, his eyes lit up. "Noelle." But before he could reach me, he was pulled back by a female colleague grabbing his sleeve. "Reed, my car broke down. Could you give me a ride?" I stood there, watching them with interest. Reed furrowed his brow, took his sleeve back from her hand, and gestured behind him, saying, "Drew, you can take her. He lives in the opposite direction from my place." The female colleague bit her lip and asked pitifully, "Are you worried that Noelle will misunderstand? I can help you explain to her." Reed raised an eyebrow, showing impatience in his expression. "Sorry, I don't have a habit of celebrating anniversaries with 3 people." I couldn't help but laugh out loud. The female colleague deflated and quickly left. Reed opened his arms, walked towards me, and spun me around in place. "My time is precious, only to be spent with my girlfriend." Ticklish, I gently moved away. "Aren't you supposed to take your medicine for your stomach ache first?" He opened the car door, protected my head, and carried me into the passenger seat, smiling softly. "Seeing you makes the pain go away." Reed started the car, gazing ahead. At a traffic light, he suddenly handed me a bouquet of champagne roses. Bought these on my lunch break. Thought it might upset you, so I wanted to cheer you up. After handing them over, he rubbed his nose, as if about to sneeze, but managed to hold it back. I sensed something was wrong. Opening his collar, I indeed saw a large rash. You fool, allergic to pollen, risking your life? I urged him to go to the hospital. The young doctor who examined him smiled and glanced at him. Allergic to love, impressive. Blushing, I looked away, but heard Reed speak openly. That's right. She is my whole world. Between Reed and me, everything was just too smooth. So smooth, it felt unreal. Our innocent first love, without any melodramatic third parties, misunderstandings, or cheating, smoothly led us all the way to engagement. Reed took his wedding leave early to accompany me to Suzhou. For some reason, my heart has been aching faintly recently, as if I'm about to lose something important. I'm very unsettled. When I went to the Shiyuan temple to pray for a safety charm, I knelt in front of the Buddha, kowtowing 3 times, palms together, closing my eyes in prayer. I hope Reed's life will be safe and smooth, filled with happiness and no worries. As if there was a telepathic connection, I turned around and our eyes met perfectly. Reed stood under the Bodhi tree draped in red silk, smiling at me with curved eyes. In that moment, I thought to myself, if there truly were gods, then surely they could hear how much I adore Reed. Hand in hand, we walked out of the temple, where a young girl politely stopped us and handed over a photo. I noticed your meaningful eye contact earlier and took a photo for you, she said with a smile. Reed thanked her, placing the photo in the pocket closest to his heart. On the second day of his wedding leave, Reed received a call, hastily preparing to leave. He held me tightly, saying, "Noelle, once the mission is complete, I'll marry you." Before I could respond, the door closed. The warm summer breeze flowed into the room, but I shivered inexplicably. For the next 6 months, Reed once again lost contact. Soon, the year drew to a close again, and just like a few years before, I sat alone in my vast room, watching the Spring Festival gala. My phone rang. I answered. Fireworks lit up outside the window, creating a ruckus. Crackling firecrackers, curses, screams, even gunshots, all sorts of noises mingled together. There was a pause at the other end, softly calling my name, Noelle. Tears welled up in my eyes instantly. Where are you? Are you okay? Have you been injured? He evaded the question, his breathing heavy. Are this year's fireworks beautiful? Yeah, but they're missing the one you gave me that year. When I was 20, Reed once set off fireworks for me. The clock on the wall ticked, the hour hand pointing to midnight. He interrupted me. Noelle. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. One after another, his voice grew softer. I covered my face, biting my lip hard to prevent any sound from escaping. Tears struggled to fall from my eyes, dropping onto the dark blanket, creating large water stains. I knew. He wanted to convey all the blessings for the rest of his life. Bang. Gunshots rang out, deafening. In an instant, the call was disconnected. Only the fireworks outside, reflecting on the cold glass. Clearly endless, never-ending. I knelt on the ground, unable to utter a sound. Reed, you lied. You clearly promised to be with me for a lifetime. You clearly said you would marry me once the mission was over. You lied. You deceiver. Deceiver. Chapter 9. When I saw Reed's body, I could hardly breathe. Like someone was strangling my throat, like a needle piercing my skin, bleeding and numb with pain. Wake up, Reed. Don't sleep. Can you get up? No one answered me. I held his cold hand, rubbing it continuously, trying to warm it up. Drew, with red eyes, choked out. Noelle, I'm sorry. The day of the bust was going smoothly, but those damn bastards actually had guns on them. Captain Reed was shot and forced into the woods by them. When we arrived, we found him having taken down several drug dealers, but he couldn't continue. Trembling, he handed me Reed's belongings. The bullet-riddled amulet. The blood-stained photo. And on the back of the photo, a line written at some point. Wishing my Noelle peace and safety. Reed. How ridiculous. The one who wished me safety, couldn't find safety in the end. I don't know how I made it back home, or how I endured until Reed's burial. There was no name on his tombstone. Every day, I sat on the steps of the Martyrs' Cemetery, looking at that square stone. When I thought of suicide, the system approached me. I agreed to help it complete the mission because I wanted to revive Reed. But finding the target for the mission was really difficult, so difficult. My mind is filled with Reed. The 17-year-old Reed who stood up for me in the classroom. At the age of 18, Reed rescued me from the bullies and carried me into the infirmary. At 20, Reed lit fireworks for me, wishing me a happy new year. At 23, Reed kissed me by the sea and confessed his feelings. At 24, even with allergies, Reed would bring me flowers to cheer me up. At 25, under the Bodhi tree at Jietai Temple, Reed smiled at me. And finally, at 26, Reed lay in eternal rest, lifeless. How could I ever forget him? So when I first saw Blake, I decided to choose him. Only by looking at that face, identical to Reed's, day and night, could I find the strength to keep going. It's despicable, isn't it? But at that time, I was truly on the brink of collapse. Without seeing that face, I would go insane. Chapter 10. So all those simp behaviors you did before were not for Blake. The long-dormant system suddenly spoke again, but for Reed? I nodded. At the same time, Blake, upon learning the truth, began to go mad in my apartment. He tore down all the photos of Reed and me, throwing them into the trash. With red eyes, he lit a lighter and coldly watched the flames lick over the photos. Enraged, I tried to stop him, but my fingers passed right through his body as if he were a ghost. It's useless, host, you're already dead. Yes, I was just a soul, unable to touch the physical world. In despair, the system gave me an idea. I can self-destruct. Exchange it for one last chance to complete the mission. I froze, trembling lips asking, why? It paused, then replied. Because your beloved is a hero. Heroes shouldn't end up as dust and bones. He should live well, enjoying a happy life. Almost instantly, tears welled up in my eyes. As consciousness gradually faded, the white light appeared once again. The system's voice grew distant. Only a faint whisper remained. Host. This time, it really is the last time. Wishing you all the best. Bring Reed back safely and soundly. Chapter 11. When I opened my eyes again, the world had restarted. The familiar apartment surroundings gave me a slight sense of reality. I sat up and saw the walls full of photos still intact, which made me breathe a sigh of relief. Running my fingers lightly over Reed's cheek, he smiled at me so gently. Suddenly, a loud banging came from the entrance. The door opened. It was Blake. He must have run over? His hair was disheveled. The moment he saw me, he grabbed my wrist and demanded. Who is he? Noelle, are you using me as a substitute? He questioned. I smiled, unable to control myself, and brushed a tear mole at the corner of his eye with my fingertip. Blake and Reed really looked alike. Even the position of this tear mole was exactly the same. After not getting an answer from me for a long time, the pressure in Blake's grip increased gradually, and his eyes started to redden. Do you know? He began. At first, I really hated you. I hated your calculated approach, I hated your fake concern. As seducers, did you ever see me as a person? Weave a beautiful dream for me, deceive me into falling for you, and then throw me away like garbage. And in the end, tell me that it was all fake. He shook my shoulders forcefully. I couldn't resist and was pushed against the wall. I thought you were different from them. Because no matter how much I humiliated you, how much I tested you, Your gaze always held hidden affection. So that last time, I really started to fall for you. His hands propped against my sides, his right hand clenched into a fist and fiercely smashed against the wall, his voice trembling. I thought you were dead, and I rushed into your home like a maniac. And what did I see? He grabbed my wrist, pushed open the bedroom door, pointed at the wall full of photos, laughing uncontrollably, his eyes growing redder. Is it fun, Noelle? You tell me, is playing with someone's heart fun, huh? I really hate you. Because you are more despicable than them. I was pushed to the ground, the cold tiles scraping my palms. Blood dripped, staining the floor red. It hurt so much. But I couldn't cry anymore. Tell me, who are you really looking at through my face? I slowly propped myself up, looked up at his eyes, and answered word by word. My beloved. He suddenly fell silent. His face turned pale, his eyelashes trembling uncontrollably. Fine, you are something else. He slowly turned his back, wiped his eyes, and when he turned back to face me again, he was full of hostility. He grabbed my neck. Since that's the case, I'll kill you and let you go down to be with him. How about that? I closed my eyes, didn't struggle, and let him tighten his grip forcefully. Cough. I should have died a long time ago, actually. I should have died in that car accident, it was the system. The system sacrificed itself to bring about my rebirth. Blake didn't say anything, just gritted his teeth and stared at me. That look, terrifying enough to tear me apart. I think I might disappoint the system. Blake really hates me. My chest felt tight, my throat hoarse, gradually unable to make a sound. Breathing became difficult, suffocating. Suddenly, that hand released me. Blake grabbed my chin, his voice extremely faint when he spoke, carrying a cold breath. I suddenly changed my mind. It's too easy to let you die like this, not interesting at all. Instead, stay by my side, witness your own death, huh? Chapter 12. I was imprisoned in Blake's private villa. He and Reed were two completely different people. I could always tell them apart. If Reed was the moon hanging high in the sky, then Blake was the untamed lone wolf. He locked me in the room, with the door always tightly shut, only delivering 3 meals a day. At first, I refused to eat no matter what. Blake squatted in front of me, pinching a photo of Reed and me, took out a lighter from his pocket, pressed the switch. The flame leaped over the edge of the photo. After you fast once, I will burn once. Until all the photos are burnt. I struggled to rush over, but my wrist was firmly held. Blake kept his promise. I watched several photos turn into ashes before my eyes. Those were my only memories. I didn't dare to confront Blake. I don't know if it was my imagination, but he visibly relaxed after I ate on time. Occasionally, he would mercifully take me out. But every time, there were other women around Blake. If you looked closely, you would notice they resembled me to some extent. As if they were retaliating against me for using him as a substitute. I had to pretend I didn't see it. As the days passed, counting down, Zara would return home today. The choice was about to begin again. But this time, I was really tired. I lay on the cold floor, staring blankly at the ceiling. I wondered, if Blake chose Zara again, would I be able to see Reed after I die? Could we still be together? Then it's better to die. When this thought came to mind, I strangely felt calm. The only thing I felt guilty about was towards the system. It sacrificed itself, but I was so useless. The roar of a car engine sounded downstairs, followed by the light and playful voice of a girl and the indulgent response of a man. A thunderbolt struck outside, splitting the dense canopy in half. The door of the room was pushed open. Zara walked over, kicked me on the ground with her toe, a hint of sarcasm in her voice. I stared blankly out the window. Until lightning struck the villa, all the lights in the room went out, and thick black smoke filled the air. The ceiling beams crashed down, trapping me and Zara in a corner. I finally understood how I was going to die this time. The fire raged. In a daze, I seemed to see Blake rushing into the room. His clothes disheveled, in a panic. After glancing at me, without stopping, he headed straight for the barely conscious Zara. The last time. He still chose her. I closed my eyes in despair, feeling like someone was changing direction and running towards me. A pair of hands securely held my waist. Noelle. Why did you have to be a conqueror? Why do you still have a lover who died in the line of duty? This time has tormented you. I feel like I'm going crazy too. Blake patted my face, and I really wanted to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt so heavy. Your lover's name is Reed, right? Honestly, I'm so jealous of him. Just now, I was thinking, if it were him, he would definitely rush to you first. Am I right? The man's fingers touched my neck, stroked my face. After a while, he sighed softly. You're safe. I should go back to save Zara. The fire is pretty big. What if I can't get out? He chuckled softly and continued. Well, that's okay. By the way, would you miss me like you miss him? It doesn't matter. I felt like I could smell the scent of the wind, the taste of freedom. A warm sensation was transmitted to my lips. As light as a dragonfly touching water. And finally, he said. Make yourself a little happier, Noelle. I slowly opened my eyes and looked at the villa not far away. It was being engulfed by raging flames. Ding. A mechanical electronic sound rang in my ears. Congratulations, host, successful conquest. Mission rewards are being redeemed. Chapter 13. When I saw Reed standing alive in front of me, I pinched my thigh hard. He held my wrist, turned his head, and smiled at me. Noelle. I'm back. I stood foolishly in place, legs weak, not daring to blink. I was really scared. Scared that the Reed in front of me was an illusion. He looked at me quietly. With a gentle pull, he embraced me. My eyes were warm and moist, tightly hugging him back. I cried and incoherently told him everything that had happened during these days. About his death, my suicide, and the system finding me. About the 3 failed conquests, about the sacrifice of the system. About the entanglement between me and Blake. He listened very attentively, especially attentively. After I finished, I looked up, red-eyed, at him. He gently ruffled my head. Noelle, for me, you really went through a lot. That night, Reed bought 2 tickets to S-City. He said he owed me a complete honeymoon trip and wanted to make it up to me. That jerk kept me up all night. The next morning at 5 o'clock, he even dragged me up the mountain to watch the sunrise. I was so tired, I couldn't even open my eyes properly, in a daze. Seeing a strip of pale light along the horizon, a deep blue sky with a rising sun, the sunlight tinting the clouds rose-colored. I leaned against Reed, staring at the beauty mark at the corner of his eye. He noticed my gaze and raised an eyebrow at me. Asked me, what's wrong? I said, people who watch the sunrise together will stay together for a very long time. Pretty silly thing to say, right? He laughed too, pinched my nose. Fool, I'll always be by your side. Descending the mountain in the thin mist, we reached P-Town, where a light drizzle began to fall from the sky. The boatman rowed, calling out to me. It's raining, want to take a covered boat? I glanced back at Reed. He was taking off his windbreaker, ready to shield me from the rain, and nodded lightly at the boatman's words. The boat gently rocked on the water's surface, the boatman humming softly in Wu dialect, a gentle breeze brushing through the willow trees on both sides, leaves drifting onto the water. I was admiring the scenery. Turning back, I caught Reed leaning against the railing, watching me. Ripples formed at the stern, the boat swayed slightly, and the clear breeze flowed in. I was shaken for a moment, almost losing my balance. Reed held onto my waist tightly. The boatman turned back and reminded me. Young lady, hold on to the railing. Once we reached the shore, I went to settle the bill. After taking a few steps, the boatman called me back and handed me a stack of change. He muttered, "Why did I give you an extra coin?" I stared blankly at his fading figure as he rode away. Suddenly, Reed called out from behind me, "Noelle. Let's go to the Shiyuan temple and get another peace charm." The misty rain separated us, making it hard to see his expression clearly. But I still agreed. I held the peace charm, and when I found Reed waiting under the Bodhi tree, he was still smiling at me. Smiling as if bathed in a spring breeze. I threw myself into his arms, holding onto his hand tightly. It wasn't a festive season, so there weren't many people outside the temple. He pressed me against the pink wall and kissed me fiercely, as if he was never going to let go. Blushing, I pushed him lightly. "Hey, behave yourself." The cold touch of his fingers brushed against my wrist, making a soft I took his hand and walked towards the bridge with flowing water, handing him the peace charm and saying, "This time, the Buddha will surely keep you safe and sound." The feeling in my hand suddenly disappeared. I turned around to look. Reed's face, under the clearing rain, became more and more blurred. He smiled slightly at me, "Noelle. Let's say goodbye here." My heart trembled for a moment. I tried to grab his hand. "Where are you going? Don't you want me anymore? Reed, don't leave me." The tourists on the street were all staring at me. I must look like a mad woman now, right? But I couldn't care less. There was only one thought filling my mind. I have to hold on to Reed. Grab him, don't let him go. Suddenly, many voices sounded in my ears. "It's dangerous by the river, don't go any further." "What's bothering you? Are you trying to commit suicide by jumping into the river?" "Young lady, listen to us, there's no obstacle in life that can't be overcome. Be good, come back quickly." Those were faces filled with tension, worry, and care. My gaze wandered through the crowd. Why wasn't Reed there? Where was he going? "Noelle, I finally found you." Drew pushed through the crowd and shouted anxiously at me. "No strategy, no system. Captain Reed has been dead for 2 years. Will you come back to the hospital with me for treatment?" Chapter 14. I was taken back to the hospital. I was sick. Severe depression and a serious case of delusional disorder. Drew stood at the door of the ward, instructing the doctor. "Don't let her go out alone again." I lay on the hospital bed and suddenly felt a long scar on my abdomen. In a daze, I remembered many things. After Reed's death, I was diagnosed with depression and hurt myself. Drew visited me at home and caught sight of this scene, sending me to the hospital. During that time, the nurse taking care of me, her biggest headache every day was how to convince me to take my medication. She must have been a young girl who had recently graduated, and several times she lost her temper. "Noelle, the dead cannot be brought back to life. If he were here, he would definitely want you to actively cooperate with treatment, right?" I buried my head in the blanket, tearfully saying, "Then bring him back to life." She remained silent for a long time. Quietly placing the medication by the bedside, she left helplessly. After some time, someone sat by my bed. It was the patient in the next bed. She was very young, looking like she hadn't reached adulthood. "Sister, actually, my situation is quite similar to yours. My boyfriend drowned while trying to save a girl from drowning." She said it with a smile, but the sadness in her eyes betrayed her. "If nothing unexpected happens, I may never be able to get over this in my lifetime. The people around me keep telling me, don't get trapped. But I really am." She paused, her voice choked up. I chose to stay behind myself. Afterwards, she often came to talk to me. Although most of the time, she was talking to herself. She would share some interesting stories with me, and also tell me about the novels she had recently read. It was a rainy spring day. "Sister, I've been reading a lot of system novels lately. Sigh, if I become a strategist and successfully complete the mission, can I bring back the dead?" My eyes stung. The wound in my heart had not healed, only to be reopened with a sharp knife. Yes. If there really was a system in this world. If successfully completing the mission could bring Reed back to life. So, I constructed a new world in my mind. In this new mental world, I was a strategist, and I had a system. To complete the mission, to resurrect Reed, I needed a target to strategize. But I couldn't develop feelings for anyone else. That's why Blake ended up looking exactly like Reed. And by using him to resurrect Reed, even if he was just a virtual object, he should hate me. That's why the process of strategizing him was so difficult. Finally, after completing the mission, Reed truly came back to life. I ran out of the hospital, took a plane to S-City alone, continuing our unfinished journey. Because it had always been just me. That's why the boatman refunded me the extra money. From beginning to end. No system, no strategy mission. No Blake, no Zara. Only. Trapped in love, repeatedly fantasizing about the resurrection of my beloved. Only me. All of this was just my obsession to see Reed one more time. I underwent treatment in the hospital for a long time. I started obediently taking my medication, and sometimes chatting with the nurse and the patient in the next bed. Everyone thinks I'm slowly getting better. When Drew came to visit me again, he said I looked much better. He placed a bouquet of flowers on my bedside. Noelle, champagne roses, your favorite. I suppressed all emotions and politely thanked him. In reality, I knew that he was taking care of me because of Reed's dying wish. I touched the fresh petals, smiled bitterly, and said, "That idiot, he used to send me flowers even if he was allergic." Drew's tone was strained. "Noelle, please. Come out." My hand paused in its caressing motion, lips parted, and softly said, "Okay." At the end of the month, it was my 26th birthday. The nurse ordered a cake for me and mischievously smeared cream on the tip of my nose. I smiled at her. She said, "Noelle, from now on, smile more often." I lowered my eyes. After a while, as if nothing had happened, I spoke up. "Today is my birthday, can I make a wish?" "Of course you can." I held the nurse's hand. "I want to go see Reed." She hesitated for a moment, perhaps thinking I was doing well recently, and reluctantly agreed. It was Drew who accompanied me to the Martyrs' Cemetery. I squatted down and placed a small piece of cream cake in front of the unmarked tombstone. "You idiot, Reed. Now, I'm the same age as you. We will be together forever, right?" I said the second half of the sentence in my heart. But Drew was still too sensitive. He wiped away a tear, helped me up from the ground, and said, "Noelle, it's getting dark. Let me take you back to the hospital." From his expression, it seemed like he was worried I might do something foolish again. I obediently nodded. He breathed a sigh of relief. On the way back, the streets were decorated with lights, red lanterns hanging from tree branches. I suddenly remembered, oh, it's almost New Year again. As the car passed by a fireworks store, I asked Drew to stop, and I bought 2 small bunches of fireworks. When he dropped me off at the hospital entrance, he received an urgent mission call. "Noelle, I understandingly smiled. "Go ahead, I can go up to my room by myself." He gritted his teeth, put me down, turned the car around, and drove off. I stood under the hospital building, holding fireworks in my arms. In the end, I didn't go back up. I traveled all the way. I went to the forest where Reed died. By then, it was close to midnight. I lit the fireworks, leaned against a tree, looked up at them bursting with brilliant colors in the night sky. "Reed. Happy New Year." I smiled, took out a fruit knife prepared earlier, and without hesitation, cut my wrist. Fresh blood spilled all over the ground. I seemed to see that person who would never come back, helplessly touched my head. "Can't I live properly? I can't. I can't." I no longer wanted to live. I said, "Reed, take me away." He was silent for a long time, but eventually took my hand. Okay, let's go home. When I closed my eyes, I was smiling. Because I can finally be with Reed forever. Chapter 15. When Drew found Noelle's body, the young man of 1.80 meters cried like a child. He kept saying, "Reed, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, I didn't take care of Noelle." When he first joined the drug control team, it was Reed who always took care of him and promoted him. He had always known how good Reed's relationship with Noelle was. Childhood sweethearts, each other's first love. Every time Noelle visited the police station, Reed's eyes seemed glued to her, as if he couldn't get enough of looking at her. His colleagues teased him, saying he was doomed for life. Reed just smiled without saying anything, raising his eyebrows proudly. "That's my future wife, can't back down, can I?" During that arrest mission, Drew didn't want to call Reed. He knew Reed was on a honeymoon with Noelle. But those drug dealers were too cunning. After setting up for almost 3 months and sacrificing 2 undercover colleagues, seeing the plan about to fail, he had no choice but to call Reed. When Reed rushed back to the police station, Drew's eyes were red. "Bro, I'm useless. You should have been with Noelle at this time." Reed patted his shoulder and said, "Do you know the mission of the police force? The mission is always greater than life. As long as the country needs us, we can sacrifice everything." And so it was said. During that crackdown operation, Reed was shot twice and forced into the woods by the drug dealers. Clutching his abdomen where he was hit, he breathed painfully, his vision starting to blur. He closed his eyes, took out his phone, and made one final call to Noelle. The fleeing drug dealers were probably catching up. They fired shots, emitting eerie screams and curses to provoke the police. The phone connected, and Noelle's voice was on the verge of tears. But she was trying to hold back. Reed looked up, watching the fireworks bursting not far away in the sky, gently asking her, "Are this year's fireworks beautiful?" Noelle said they were very beautiful, but not as beautiful as the one he gave her years ago. Reed smiled silently. He wished her a happy new year many times. The unsaid words were, "Noelle, be happy. In every year I'm not there." A moment before the drug dealers found him, he hung up the phone decisively. His Noelle, timid. It's better she doesn't hear the bloody scene that follows. After a fierce battle, both sides wounded. Reed killed the drug dealers, but he also took a shot to the chest. When Drew found Reed, his blood had already stained the barren ground. Trembling, Reed reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, saying with difficulty, "I was planning to come back alive and marry her. Now it seems impossible. Throw away the ring, never tell her. My Noelle, she will marry someone else in the future." Drew took the ring, his fingertips turning white from gripping it tightly. He kept wiping away tears. Blood gushed from his chest. Like a fish drowning in the deep sea, a suffocating sensation engulfed his entire body. In his final moments before consciousness faded away, he struggled to part his lips and said, "Noelle, I'm sorry. I still couldn't marry you. In our next life, we must be full of love and affection, and I will arrange a wedding for you." Reed died at the age of 26. Noelle perished at the age of 26 on New Year's Day.